for the EPS, the Emergency Paramedic Service, and she goes on, it took over 1 hour plus a phone call initiated by myself to Rachel Musico to find the number. And then she went on at paragraph 235 to say, I raised this concern at a meeting on 13 December 2016. And she says, those at the meeting informed me there is a contact phone numbers book in the nurses' station. She says, this being the case, why didn't the RN know? So I just ask you to accept that's the context for the complaint that she raised with the Aged Care Complaints Commissioner. Do you understand that?
I do.
All right. Now, just ask you a little bit about yourself, Mr. Woodley, and then I'll ask you some questions about that. You've been employed at Japara since 2012.
That is correct, yes.
You initially were employed as a quality manager, is that right?
Yes.
We've had evidence, sorry I didn't mean to talk over you, we had evidence from other quality managers. Your responsibility was to assist with ensuring that various Japara facilities that you were responsible for met their legislative obligations, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you're also, part of your task was to ensure that they met internal procedures and policies that were applicable to them?
Yes.
All right. Now, in 2017, in February, you moved into a different position as Group Quality Manager?
Yes.
And in the hierarchy at Japara, that's a position that's senior to the position of Quality Manager?
Yes. It was a new position.
Right. And you had quality managers reporting to you from that time on, is that right?
Yes.
You managed a team of about 7 quality managers who performed the functions that you were previously performing when you had that role?
Yes.
They were accountable to you?
Yes.
And you were accountable to the CEO, Mr. Sootholtz, is that right?
Yes.
Right. Now, we've had evidence from Ms. Julie Reid, who you would know from previously employed by Japara.
Yes.
Her evidence is that she resigned in January 2017. Was the role you came into a role that was similar to the one that she had previously held, albeit under a different title?
No, Julie Reid's role was taken over by Wendy Waddell.
I see.
At the time of Julie's retirement, we created a few extra roles in between Julie and where Julie was and the quality managers. So it was a new role that I took on some of the responsibilities that Julie used to have.
All right.
She used to manage the quality managers directly. Now I manage them directly, and then I reported to Wendy Waddell. Okay.
I want to ask you some questions about the complaint that was made by Nolene Heusler. And just so that it's clear, it was a complaint she made to the Aged Care Complaints Commissioner, and their code for that complaint was S17/006439. You don't need to concern yourself too much with that, but it's important that we know what complaint we're talking about. As you'll be aware, there were 11 issues raised in that complaint. You understood that?
Yes.
Yep. And it was part of your function to enable Japara to respond to those 11 issues. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Your task was to interrogate, I use that term in a neutral fashion, you would interrogate relevant documents and employees of Japara to enable the response to be made. Is that right?
That's correct. I was in Victoria the whole time, so the people at Mitcham collected the information and sent it over to me.
Yes.
And then I reviewed that and made sense of it and wrote a response.
And the events that were the subject of the complaint all occurred in 2016 when you were a quality manager employed by Japara. Is that right?
Yes, I had not much direct contact during Clarence Housel's time at Mitcham.
Yes.
You know, that was handled by Diane Jones, who you've spoken to.
Yes.
It was only in 2017, when I took on the new role, that I was involved in the actual responses or decision making.
All right. And the way the complaint was processed was that a letter was sent to Japara by the Complaints Commissioner setting out the 11 issues and seeking a response from Japara in relation to each of them. Is that right?
The Complaints Department called myself and Wendy Waddell.
Yes.
And went through the 11 points with us, and we discussed, you know, if we understood what the issues were.
Yes.
And then they sent us the letter after that discussion and asking us to respond.
Okay. And issue number 5, as I think you're aware, is the issue that we're concerned about, and that's the one that related to Ms Hoysler's concern about the inability of the nurse to find the number for the paramedic on that night on the 11th of December 2016. You understood that that was issue number 5 that was being explored and investigated by the Complaints Commissioner?
Yes.
Now, paragraph 13 of your statement, do you have a copy of your statement in front of you, Mr Woodley?
I will get it from someone. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. It might assist you if you read it with me. It's
Paragraph
13 at the top of page 3.
Yes.
Yes. Do you see that you write, I believe that when the complaint was first received by Japara, we were contacted by the Complaints Department by telephone. And
yes.
that we is yourself and Ms Waddell, who you mentioned a moment ago.
Yes.
All right. You then go on, during the telephone call, we advised the Complaints Department that the facility manager had provided the number for the ECP, that's the paramedic.
Yes, service.
When contacted on 11 December 2016. So that was the information that you provided. You said the facility manager gave the relevant information on the night.
Yes.
Relevant phone number. And you write, I recall being told that this would not be a sufficient response to issue 5. Do you see that in your statement?
Yes.
And doing the best you can, and I understand this is some time ago, what was said by the representatives of the Complaints Commissioner? Did they say that wouldn't be a sufficient response, or did they give
No,
any
what they said... Sorry.
Go on.
They read out the issue that was raised, and, you know, that we could not locate the number. And I said, but the nurse, she may have been under pressure, she may have been a bit flustered, she couldn't find the number, so her action was to ring the facility manager, who could then tell her the number, and that number was 000. And I said, is that a sufficient response? They said, no, that is not what the complainant is looking for. She wants to know that we've done something about it, so next time, if the nurse needs the number, that won't happen again. So I had to not just say what happened, I had to say, you know, I had to reassure Ms Housler that we'd put something in place so it would not occur again.
In paragraph 14 of your statement, you say, following this call, I sent the emails in document, and then you identify the document which is attached to your statement, and you say, in the context of trying to determine what further response could be provided to the Complaints Department. Do you see that?
Yes.
And the emails that we're talking about, which is what I really want to ask you about, are attached to your statement as attachment SW4, and in the evidence before the Commission there, tab 144, which I think you have in front of you, an email chain involving yourself,
Yes.
Ms Jones and Ms Musico.
Yes.
I understand it can't be shown on the screen for technical reasons, but as long as you can see the document, Mr Woodley.
Yes.
All right. Now we need to read this, as with any email chain, from the end going upwards, don't we, Mr Woodley?
Yes.
To understand the sequence.
Yes.
And this email chain only concerns issue number 5. I take it there were other emails to do with other issues that were the subject of the complaint?
Yes.
And in each of them, you were writing to the relevant officers within Japaro who had direct knowledge of the relevant matters. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
And so we see at the bottom of that page that you've written to Ms Jones, who was the quality manager with responsibility for the Mitcham facility. Is that correct?
To Diane Jones and to Rachel, yes.
Rachel Musico was the facility manager.
Correct.
And you then set out, you've quoted the question that you've been asked by the commissioners, that is the commissioner, issue number 5, concerned that the service could not locate the contact details for the extended care paramedic on 13 December 2016. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we turn to the second page of the email chain,
Yes.
there's a heading, Our Response. Do you see that?
Sorry, yes.
Our Response. And you have there typed the answer that you're proposing to give to the Commissioner in response to its investigation about that issue. Is that right?
Yes.
Yep. And other than some very minor changes, that is in fact the response that appeared in the letter that went back to the Commissioner. Is it not?
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Yeah. The attachment number changed, I think, because there was a bit of a change in the numbering. Is that right?
Possibly, yes.
All right. So that was the answer that you were proposing, and then underneath it you wrote to Ms Jones and Ms Musico, do we have evidence that it was listed somewhere on the day? And by
Yes.
that question you were inquiring of them whether there was a listing of the number on the 13th of December 2016 at Mitcham, weren't you?
Correct.
Yeah. And that was because you knew that's what the Complaints Commissioner wanted to know. What was the state of play on the 13th of December 2016?
Where could the number be found, or why couldn't the number be found? Yes, that's what they were asking.
Yeah, they wanted to know whether it was available to the nurse.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you asked Ms Jones and Ms Musico whether it was available, and you then went on and said, if not, add it to the contact list now.
Yes.
Why were you directing them to add it to the contact list now, in February?
When I was just trying to find out what the situation was on the night. Was it on the contact list or was it not? When they said it wasn't there, I was actually quite happy, because then I thought, okay, now I know what I can do, what improvement I can make to reassure the complainant we've made an improvement so it won't happen again. So I was explaining, they weren't privy to the conversation with the complaints department, so I was explaining that's all we need to do. We need to fix the contact list to show that we've made an improvement so it won't happen again.
Mr Woodley, you well understood that what the Complaints Commissioner was asking was whether the number was available to the nurse on the night in question, didn't you?
I think we'd established that the number wasn't available on the night in our phone call.
Well, you don't say that in your statement, do you, that that's what you told them in the phone call? Or have I missed something?
Well, I said during the night, the nurse could not find the number anywhere, so she contacted the facility manager who gave her the number.
Yes, but Mr Woodley, you understand there are at least two explanations for the nurse not being able to find the number. One is the number was there, but she didn't know where to look, which might raise a question of her training.
Yes.
Yes. And another explanation is the number wasn't there, which might raise a more fundamental problem of a systemic nature at the Mitcham facility. Do you understand the distinction I'm drawing?
Yes.
Yep. And you understood that that's precisely what the Aged Care Complaints Commissioner wanted to ascertain. You've got to ascertain what the problem is first before you come up with a solution, don't you, Mr Woodley?
Yes, I suppose.
Yep. Going back to your email, this is the email of the 20th of February. At the very end of it, you wrote, if not, in other words, if the number's not, it was not there on the day, add it to
Yes.
the contact list now. Do you see you wrote that?
Yes.
And you went on, we are only saying it is, capital I, capital S, on the list, not was, capital W, capital A, capital S. What were you conveying to Ms Jones and Ms Musico there?
I was saying we're not saying that it was there on the night. I'm saying that we've fixed it now and it's there now. I think it's quite clear what my intention of the statement was. I was making it clear.
I suggest to you, Mr Woodley, that the reason you have included the words is in capitals and was in capitals is that what you're conveying to Ms Jones and Ms Musico is that we're not lying in our response to the Commissioner. We're just not giving them a complete answer to the question that they're asking. What do you say to that?
No, I was explaining they didn't understand what I had to do to make the complainant happy, that we had to tell them that it was there now, not that it was there on the night. That is what they wanted to know.
Well, the concern that they wanted to know couldn't be clearer, could it, Mr Woodley? If you go back to the first page of the email exchange, the concern is only concerned with what was the state of play on the 13th of December 2016.
I will grant you I could have written a much more thorough response, but I was not trying to
Well, it's not
mislead them.
It's not just a matter of a more thorough response. You didn't answer the question that they were asking. You answered a different question.
I answered the question that they asked me to answer in the phone call.
I see. Is there any reason why you didn't detail that that's what they asked you to provide them in the phone call in your statement at paragraph 13?
No, and in hindsight, I should have explained that we'd had that conversation, but I didn't. There's no reason for that.
See, all you say in the statement made a few days ago is, I recall being told that this would not be a sufficient response to issue 5. Do you see that?
Yes.
In paragraph 18 of your statement, you accept, don't you, that in hindsight, it would have been preferable to specify the circumstances that existed on 11 December 2016. I think there's a bit of confusion, and I'm not criticising you for this, about those two dates, 11 and 13.
That was the department's error.
Indeed. You accept that that it would have been preferable to tell them about the circumstance on the 11th of December 2016.
Yes.
You say that, don't you?
Yes.
What I'm trying to understand, Mr Woodley, is why you didn't. It was such a simple question and it could have been so simply answered.
I wrote a bad answer. That's my answer.
So I think we're agreed that you didn't answer the question.
Very well, yes.
Yep. You want the Commission to accept that there's an innocent explanation for that.
Yes.
That's what it comes down to.
Yes.
Are you able to tell us the date of that phone call that you described in paragraph 13 of your statement?
No, I'm not. The letter that they sent us to outline the complaint is often sent the same day or the day after.
It's a pretty small window that we're looking at, isn't it, between the date of the letter and the date of your response, which is the 20th of February. Is that right? The phone call happened in that intervening period.
Yes.
Are you in the habit of making notes of such phone calls when you're talking to regulators about formal complaints?
No, because they go through the 11 points of the complaint, and then they say, we'll send you a summary of those complaints at the end of this phone call. So we don't know what they're going to talk about when they ring, so.
I'm not sure you're answering my question. You understood you were having a formal phone call with a regulator about a formal complaint that had been made about your employer. That's right,
Yes.
isn't it? And
Yes.
are you saying you made no notes of that telephone call?
I made no notes of that meeting.
Do you know if Ms Waddell made any notes of that telephone
No,
call?
she made no notes of that meeting.
You've inquired of her, have you?
No, well, she was there at the time and we were just listening.
I see. And is that standard practice that no notes are made of such telephone calls within Japara?
Of those phone calls? No, it's not.
It's not standard practice.
No.
Ordinarily, notes would be made. Is that what you're saying?
No, if they rang me tomorrow with the same thing, I wouldn't have taken notes. I would wait for what they have put in their letter.
I see. You accept, don't you, Mr Woodley, that particularly in the position you hold, which is a very senior one within Japara, that it's important that you are not only provide honest answers to regulators' inquiries, but you also have to provide complete answers, don't you?
I do.
You accept now that the answer you provided was not a complete answer, in hindsight?
I do.
The reason it's particularly important for someone in your position is you set the tone, don't you, as Group Quality Manager for your subordinates?
Yes.
Yep. You know that part of your role is to lead by example. That is to lead
Yes.
the quality managers by example.
Yes. Can I read part 19 of my statement?
You may.
Well, as you know, I was new in that role at the time. Since that time, in the 2 years I've been in the role, we've reviewed the way we respond to all complaints.
Yes.
So, we're more thorough now explaining what happened at the time, what actions we've identified, what gaps we've identified in the situation, what we've done about it, and even what we've evaluated that what we did is effective. Now, that's also an increased expectation from the complaints department because it's changed from the Aged Care Complaints Commission to the Aged Care Quality Commissioner. So we have made improvements since that time.
Thank you.
And I don't think this would happen again.
Thank you, Mr Woodley. Can I ask, are those changes documented in some way?
No, I've said process, so when I'm talking to quality managers and they've given me a draft response, I say, we haven't been thorough enough here, can you go through and make those particular points?
I want to ask you about one other matter, if I may, Mr
Yes.
Woodley. You should have a document in front of you which has got a code in the top right-hand corner, JAH.0001.0005.5917. It's behind
Yes.
tab 123. Do you have that? It's headed Reconfirmation of Issues Letter. You
Yes.
see that?
Yes.
Once again, if we go to the second page of that, please, first, you'll see in the middle of the page there's an email from Jerome Jordan. Do you see that?
Yes.
Mr Jordan was the Executive Director of Operations at Japara Healthcare Limited at this time, October 2016.
Correct.
Was that a position senior to yours within the hierarchy?
Yes, it was at the same level as Julie Reid, but he was more operations, Julie was more clinical care.
I see. This is an email dated the 19th of October 2016.
Yes.
Sent to you, notifying you of the issues letter in another At the bottom, there's an email from you to Ms Jones and Ms Musico of Mitcham. Is that right?
Yes.
And the subject is the same, and you say good afternoon, and then if we go to the second page it continues, another complaint re Mr Heusler's care. I will discuss here how we are to approach ongoing complaints with Julie on her return on Monday.
Correct.
And the Julie there is a reference to Julie Reid?
Yes, I think she was on sick leave.
All right. And you're writing this in your then capacity as a quality manager. Is that right?
Oh, yes.
Then if we go back to the first page, and I'm sorry to jump you round.
That's all right.
Ms Jones responded to you on the same day, 19 October 2016. She wrote, I don't want to say this is getting really old. Regards, Di Jones. Do you see that?
Yes.
That probably should read, I don't know what to say.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what you understood she was saying to you. And do you see your response at the top of the page? I might ask you to read that out if you could, please,
I
Mr.
was
Wood.
speechless. I want to talk to Julie about progress with VCAT. We need to stand up for our rights and say this is harassment.
You thought it was harassment, didn't you, the complaints that were being made by Ms Heusler?
No, that's not what I meant. I was saying it's harassment by the department.
What the department conveying to you complaints it had received from Ms Heusler was harassment by the department.
Okay, so we all agree that a horrible incident happened to Mr Hausler in the end of 2015.
Yes.
We reported to the police what had occurred. We reported to the department that we need to report to that an assault had occurred. The Aged Care Accreditation Agency came in and reviewed the whole process. The Aged Care Agency came in again and reviewed the whole process. I think after it was on television, they came in for a third time and reviewed everything we did for all our residents. Not one of those people had said there was anything wrong with what we'd done. A whole year later, after that incident, so this is October 2016, the same department writes a letter to us saying, we've just found out there was an incident in 2015. Can you tell us all about it and what you've done? And I'm like, how many people from the same department are going to come out and want the same information when possibly couldn't they communicate with each other and say, what do we know about this and what can we do?
Mr Woodley, you knew that there were 3 assaults within a period of 10 days concerning the late Clary Heusler, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And one of those, the very first, was on the 31st of August 2015, wasn't it?
Yes.
And it wasn't reported to the department until more than a year after it occurred, in 2016.
Is it a year? Is that correct?
Perhaps I stand corrected there. It might have been August, but it was either just before or just after a year. I don't have the date in front of me.
Yes.
Now, the explanation that's been given for that is by Ms Reid was that Japara didn't know about that incident until it was in the Advertiser, the Adelaide Advertiser newspaper. Do you understand that?
I understand that's her evidence, yes.
Yeah. So it wasn't as if this was, as at October 2016, old news, was it?
Sorry? It's 12 months later.
Yeah. But the report had only just come in relation to one of those incidents, hadn't it?
I don't think so. The incident was in 2015.
Yes.
It was reported a couple of months after it occurred.
That was the 1st of September incident that was reported a couple of months later. The 31st of August incident was not reported until 2016. Are you not aware of that, Mr Woodley?
I do not have the dates straight in my head, I'm sorry.
The use of capital letters, which you're obviously fond of, indicates
Yes.
what? Emphasis, presumably, does it?
I was trying to support Di and Rachel that they're trying to care for 30 other residents, including Mr Hausler, and the department keeps going back and asking them the same questions.
So what, Japara was the victim in all this, was it, Mr Woodley?
No, Diane was a co-worker. I was just supporting her, you know, saying you're going to have to spend another week answering the same question again.
What's the reference to VCAT, Mr. Woodley? What's that all about?
VCAT, I said the wrong thing. I don't know what the South Australian version is. As I said, I'm not it's the Guardianship Board.
Do you mean SACAT,
Yes,
the guardianship
sorry,
application?
At the time I was working in Victoria, I didn't know what it was called in South Australia.
I see.
I can't recall what I meant. I can guess that maybe Julie Reid was answering the same questions that were in the document the department had sent us, and so was saying rather than Rachel having to start from scratch and write all the response again, she might be able to help use some of the information we'd gathered for the guardianship hearing.
Was there some proposal to initiate some proceeding in, I think it's the South Australian Tribunal, I think we've established, by Japara against Ms. Heusler, or does this relate to her guardianship application?
I have no knowledge. I only knew that Julie was responding to some questions from the Guardianship Board.
Finally, Mr. Woodley, we've got a statement from the man who's ultimately your boss, Mr. Sootholz.
Yes.
He was asked, what is Japara's attitude towards complaints made by family members about care? And this is the evidence that he's given in paragraph 54 of his statement to the Royal Commission. He says, Japara views any complaints, including complaints made by family members, as a means to improve the services and care we provide. You understand that's the evidence he's given?
Yes.
Do you think your email of the 19th of October 2016, in which you're accusing the regulator of harassment in pursuing a response from your organisation about a complaint made by a family member, is consistent with that approach to complaints?
It doesn't read that way. I wasn't saying we shouldn't respond. I was just saying to my colleague, you know, you're going to have to do a lot of work again.
Is it another...
I'm the biggest complainer in the world in my personal life because I know it results in better service for other people.
Is it another example of unfortunate language in an email in hindsight, Mr. Woodley?
Yes. It was an email between me and Diane.
No further questions, Commissioners.
Yes, thank you for your evidence, Mr. Woodley. You're excused from further attendance.
All right, thank you.
Commissioners, I think we need to have a brief break while we reorganise the...
We'll break the link to Melbourne and the Commission will temporarily adjourn.
Thank you, sir.
We'll stand. The Royal Commission is temporarily adjourned.
Yes, Ms Hill.
Commissioner, I called Anna Irwin, Emma Murphy, Gay Whitford and Paddy Houston. Commissioner, they will give their evidence in a panel form.
Yes.
Please repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
will be the truth,
will be the
Will be
truth,
the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Mrs Whitford, if I could start with you. Could you please tell the commissioners your full name?
Gay Margaret Whitford,
And whereabouts do you live?
Streaky Bay, South Australia,
And how old are you?
41.
What is your occupation, Mrs Irwin?
Uh,
Apologise, Mrs Whitford.
yeah, registered nurse and residential care coordinator.
And what qualifications do you hold in respect to those?
Bachelor of Nursing, and I've just completed a graduate diploma in aged care.
And have you prepared a statement dated the 4th of June of this year?
I have.
Operator, could you please display document ID WIT stop 129 stop 0001 stop 0001. Mrs Whitford, do you see that statement displayed in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Are there any changes that you'd seek to make to that statement?
No, there isn't.
Are the contents of that statement true and correct?
They are.
Commissioner, I tender that statement.
Yes, the witness statement of Gay Whitford dated the 4th of June 2019 will be Exhibit 5-22.
As the Commission pleases. Ms Murphy, could I ask you to state your full name, please?
Emma Caitlin Murphy.
And whereabouts do you live, Ms Murphy?
I live in Brisbane, Queensland.
And how old are you, Ms Murphy?
I'm 21 years old.
What is your occupation?
I'm a registered nurse,
And what qualifications do you hold in respect of that?
a Bachelor of Nursing.
Operator, could I ask you to display document ID WIT stop 1131 stop 0001 stop 0001. Ms Murphy, have you prepared a statement dated 7 June of this year?
Yes, I have.
And do you see a copy of that statement on the monitor before you?
Yes, I do.
Is there anything you'd seek to change or amend in that statement?
No, thank you.
And are the contents of that statement true and correct?
Yes, they are.
I tender that, Commissioner.
Yes, the witness statement of Emma Caitlin Murphy dated the 7th of June 2019 will be Exhibit 5-23.
If the Commission pleases. Ms Irwin, could I ask you to state your full name, please?
Anna Christine Irwin.
And you live in a coastal town in Western Australia?
Yes, I do.
And what is your age, Ms Irwin?
I'm 22.
And what is your occupation?
I'm a physiotherapist.
And what qualifications do you hold in respect of that?
A Bachelor of Physiotherapy.
Operator, could I ask you to display document ID WIT stop 1127 stop 0001 stop 0001. Ms Irwin, have you prepared a statement dated 12 June of this year?
Yes, I have.
And do you see a copy of that statement on the monitor before you?
Yes, I do.
Are there any changes that you'd seek to make to that statement?
No, I don't.
And are the contents of that statement true and correct?
Yes, they are.
Commissioner, I tender that statement.
Yes, the witness statement of Anna Irwin dated the 12th of June 2019 will be Exhibit 5-24.
As the Commission pleases. Mrs Houston, could I ask you to state your full name to the Commissioners?
Patty Ann Houston
And where do you live, Ms Houston?
at Gawler in South Australia.
And what is your age?
I'm 64.
What is your occupation, Ms Houston?
I'm a personal care worker, Cert 3.
And is that a Certificate 3 in...
Sorry, Certificate 3 in aged care.
And have you prepared a statement dated the 4th of June of this year?
I have.
Operator, could I ask you to please display document ID WIT stop 1130 stop 0001, stop 0001. Mrs Houston, do you see a copy of your statement on the monitor before you?
Yes, I do.
Are there any changes or amendments you'd seek to make to that statement?
No, there's not.
And are the contents of that statement true and correct?
They are.
Commissioner, I tender the statement of Mrs Houston.
The witness statement of Patty Houston dated the 4th of June 2019 will be Exhibit 5-25.
As the Commission pleases. Mrs Houston, you've been a personal care worker for about 10 years after a varied career. Could I ask you to describe to the Commissioners a typical day shift in your role as a personal care worker?
Sure. So my shift starts at 7 o'clock in the morning. I usually arrive at about 6:30 and make sure that I am up to date with all my messages and handover that I need to be prepared to before I go on the floor. Once we start working, there's not much time to be looking at computers and reading notes. So I will find out which residents are going to be showered for the day, and also whether anyone needs to have a urine sample taken or maybe have to have their weight taken, so forth. And I'll write that down on a piece of paper in my pocket and take that onto the floor with me so that I'm well prepared to care for the people that I'm looking after. I'll also read a handover sheet which is presented on our Lee Care computer program, and that will fill me in on everything that's happened in the home with all the residents for the day. Such things as if they've had a fall overnight or they've become ill or anything out of the ordinary is recorded on that, and that helps us to give our best care. Then at 7 o'clock I'll go into handover, which is given by the night registered nurse. The staff that have been on overnight will hand over anything significant that's happened overnight in the home, and that's across the home. And then I'll grab my keys and my phone, and we carry a computer in our pockets so we can do point of care contact, do our documentation on that. And then I'll go onto the floor, find my partner and give her any information that she needs to know from that handover. And then we commence work. So that involves helping people out of bed, showering them, dressing them and preparing them for the day. And that will happen between 7 and 8 a.m. And I mostly work in the dementia area of our home, which is my passion. And we'll work together till 8 o'clock, sometimes separately with individuals, or otherwise we may have to assist a two-person assist where lifters are required to help the person out of bed. And then at 8 o'clock is breakfast time, so we need to get the trolley from the kitchen and bring the porridge and cereal to the area where we're working. We make their toast and their coffee, and as much as possible we bring residents to the table so that they can enjoy their meal sitting in the dining area. Some people will refuse that and others are not able to. We just physically haven't got the time to have everyone in an hour to the table, so we may have to take meals to rooms, and some people need assistance with their food as well, so that takes a little bit of extra time. After breakfast we turn the trolley to the kitchen, and then we continue with personal care work for the rest of the residents in the area. And that generally takes from 7 to 12 o'clock to attend to 12 people with 2 carers assisting. So the dementia area is actually divided into 2 sections. So we have 8 people at one end and 8 people at the other. So there's 2 carers for one lot of 8 and 2 carers for the other lot of 8. But in the other part of the home, there are 2 carers to 12 people. So at 10:30 in the morning, we provide morning tea, which we prepare and serve to the residents, and sometimes we'll need to be taking that to them and actually physically assisting them to eat that and have their drinks. And then the care work will continue after that until lunchtime. And then once again, bain-marie service comes to our dining room, and we assist residents to the table to have their meal where possible. We encourage that for the social interaction. And once again, some people will need to have assistance with eating their food. At 12:30 I take my lunch, and that's for half an hour, and then at 1 o'clock I'm back on the floor, and the afternoon mostly consists of assisting people to the toilet and attending to their personal needs in that respect. And where possible, we take as many residents as we can to the main living area where they are able to join in with activities provided by our lifestyle staff. So my shift finishes at 3:30 in the afternoon. In between all of this, there will be documentation happening. It's supposed to happen at point of contact, and that's not always possible, but the other things that need to be done, such as delivering laundry skips to the laundry, returning trolleys to the kitchen, making beds, showering people. It's quite a busy time, and we do walk quite long distances from various areas of the home to get everything done. So, and then we will be caring for people who may be in palliative care, as well as those who are, in more healthy circumstances, I suppose. So basically that would be my day.
Mrs. Houston, are you able to describe what person-centred care means to you in your role?
Person-centred care means to me is knowing a person very well. So when they come to the home, we do a complete care plan, so that really looks after their more physical sides of their needs. Most people that come in have multiple health issues that need to be cared for. One part of what that I feel that we're failing in, particularly dealing with people with dementia, is not addressing their emotional and personal needs as a person. So a person, I've actually written down here, this is a quote from Professor Tom Kitwood, who has done a lot of work, written a lot of books in regard to person-centred care, and his description is a way of thinking and doing things that sees the person using the service for the consumer or resident as equal partners in the planning, development and monitoring of care to make sure it meets their needs. It involves working with people and their families to find the best ways to provide their care. So this is a whole, looking at a person as a whole, not just they need to be in a room, they need to be washed and cleaned. We need to be actually filling their needs as human beings, and so much time happens where people are sitting alone in a room, or even sitting in a community room where they don't have any interaction with one-on-one with people. And as a person working in dementia care, I find that really confronting and disturbing, and would like to see that change.
Mrs. Whitford, you've worked in aged care since 1997, and in the last 9 years you detail in your statement that you've been the coordinator of a 15-bed home.
Mm-hmm.
In your role, how many personal care workers are working in that home with you on a day shift?
On the day shift, we have 2 in the morning, we have 2 in the afternoon and 1 on night shift.
And how do you feel about person-centred care in your role?
I feel that person-centred care is a term that's overused. I think we are not fulfilling that term adequately enough. We need to be looking at a holistic view of the person, their emotional and spiritual needs, not just their chronic conditions. I feel that we don't provide enough time in order to achieve this with these people. And the mental and emotional outcomes when you do provide this time is very rewarding.
Do you feel that you're able to support the personal care workers working with you to provide person-centred care?
I certainly hope I do. My role I come in, my hours vary a little, but I generally come in the morning and try to get what I can done in the office, and then I make it my duty to go out and at least assist one person every day to prepare for that day. I feel in my role you need to know what the care needs of the residents are before you can coordinate their care, and to support the care workers, because there may be certain aspects that I can pick up on that perhaps have been missed, in order to provide more comfort to the person. You know, maybe that's appropriate footwear or something small that can make a big change in their day.
Are there particular challenges that you face, Mrs. Whitford, to delivering person-centred care because your facility is located rurally?
Yes, very much so. Some of our resources are very limited. Our staffing is minimal. We have a very small volunteer base. Even access to allied health or geriatricians is very difficult, logistical concerns. And even often the inability to organise contracted alternative therapies to come in and assist because of the financial regulations. So, you know, providing some people that we've tried it before enjoy yoga, and I've had a local girl come in to provide this for them voluntary, and they've actually really enjoyed it, but we haven't been able to have the funds to support this as an ongoing activity.
Ms. Irwin, you graduated as a physiotherapist in 2008 and you've had some exposure to working in aged care. Could I ask you to describe what the physiotherapist's role is in aged care?
Yeah, I graduated in 2018. So the physio role in aged care, of what I've seen since I've graduated and during my degree as well, is to attend the facility, and we go in. Our role is to apply specific therapies which we're funded through the funding model to provide. These consist of either technical equipment which is specific for pain management, or therapeutic massage. So we can apply one of these two therapies for pain management, and that is our main role, is for pain management. And what we do with the residents is we put them on a pain list, and it's called the pain clinic, and we apply one of these two therapies.
And who directs what you do when you attend upon a residential care setting?
From my role that I participated in with my current job, it was the facility managers provided the paperwork, and then myself and my colleague would carry out the work. But I didn't really have much guidance as per se, because it's not really a job that's very difficult. It's not hard to complete once you have the paperwork and you have the list of residents and you know what to do. You just go to each person that's on your list and then you tick them off. It's basically a box ticking system.
And would you ever have any interaction with the personal care workers of the places you work?
Yeah, multiple times, and I think that personal care workers, I admire the work that they do in aged care. The work that physio does, I think, is a lot more passive and a lot more pointless than the care that the personal care workers give.
If I can turn to you, Ms Murphy, you've worked as an agency nurse in several aged care homes since 2017. How many different places have you worked at since that time?
Oh, there'd be countless, anywhere from 10 to 20 facilities throughout Queensland.
And how many residential care places would you attend in an average week for you, Ms Murphy?
It could vary. I could do 5 shifts at one facility in a week, or I could do 5 shifts in 5 different facilities in the same week.
And do you see the same level of staff across the different facilities that you attend upon?
It does also vary. So some facilities are quite a bit smaller, so they might have a 60 resident capacity. Others are a lot larger, perhaps 150 residents in a facility.
What is the approach that you take when you walk through the door of somewhere new?
So it's quite overwhelming looking after anywhere from 20 to 60 residents that you're not familiar with. So after handover, I make it my duty to go around and see everyone, see what sort of needs that they have that aren't necessarily documented. Everyone in aged care is at a different level of care. So I think it's really important to understand the needs that they have.
In your statement, you give an example of a husband and wife that live at the same facility. And if I could ask you to describe that example to the Commissioners.
Yeah, so as an agency nurse, I've seen multiple examples that I identify as poor person-centred care. The one that you're referring to was of a married couple that live in residential aged care. They entered together. The wife has late-stage dementia, so she has a tendency to abscond or wander. So she resides in a secure wing of the facility, and her husband, who also has dementia but is not as cognitively declined as she is, resides in a separate area of the facility. And so he often becomes confused and would like to go and see his wife, asks, like, when can I go and see her? So because of restrictive restraint policies in aged care, he cannot reside in the same wing as her because he doesn't have the tendency to wander. So he will come to the nurses and ask to be escorted to see her. He's allocated 1 hour twice a day to see his wife, and he'll come and ask us many times a day to come and see her. And often, due to time constraints, we have to let him know that he's already seen her twice today, he has to wait until tomorrow, or it's not his time yet, or sometimes staff might be busy and he might only be able to see her once a day.
And why did you bring that example to the Commission's attention?
So I think this is a really good example of how person-centred care is not being executed correctly in aged care. It's demonstrated by the sheer volume and demand of our residents. As I said previously, I would look after 20 to 60 residents. Our care staff have the same volume issues, so we can't give the time and attention that each person deserves. And this example is, it really displays the challenges that we face in delivering person-centred care in aged care.
Mrs. Houston, with that example in mind, have you been in that situation yourself from the perspective of your role as a personal care worker?
Yes, certainly that would be a daily occurrence where I work, and particularly working with people with dementia. Each of those people has quite different needs, and we have probably a large portion who are two-person assists due to their mobility. And so if you have two carers in an area and they are both with one particular person, then they're not able to be supporting anyone else during that time. So it does become difficult, and we need to be aware at all times that even when we're trying to be focusing on the person that we're with, that we have to be aware of everything else that might be happening outside the door. Making sure that people don't have falls. We have a no restraint policy, so people are free to move as they are able and want to. And it's very demanding to try and cover all bases.
Are you able to cover all bases?
I think in a physical sense we are, but certainly not in an emotional sense. We're very lacking in that respect, and our home has a few volunteers but not a lot, and that would certainly fill the gap if we could have some volunteers who could come and sit, because often people with dementia just need company. They just need to be been with. It's not that you have to have fantastic craft projects or anything like that happening. Sometimes it's just a comfort for them to have someone sitting with them and talking to them and just being in their reality at that time. And so it is difficult at the moment.
Mrs. Whitford, have you had to deal with a situation like that in your role as a manager?
Yes, I have. Probably almost the opposite. People assume that married couples want to be together, which often isn't the case. We've had a lady with quite advanced dementia recently be relocated to the high end of the local hospital, where her husband resides, and they have looking at putting them together. But I sort of said to them, perhaps that may not be her wish. So it's getting to know the person and their history and who they are, and not just assuming.
And what do you do to support the personal care workers that you're working with to understand the need for flexibility in those circumstances?
Yeah, I encourage, if they do stay a bit longer, that, you know, I try to help them out or let them, it's sort of providing that flexible time, because we do have a lot of time constraints. I think it's just being there, being a voice for them, going out and assisting them when you know that they're busy, or if someone's calling out and you know that they're assisting someone else, going out and attending to that person and maybe redirecting them and letting them know where they are.
How would you describe the relationship that you have with the personal care workers at your facility?
I think we work quite well as a team. And that's really what it's about. It's not just the team with the workers, it's the team with your residents as well. It's being almost an extended family. It's just being aware, particularly in a smaller facility. I've worked interstate in Victoria in large facilities, and I find a smaller facility is much more accommodating to person-centred care. We know each other, you know, the needs. And it's unlike sort of working in different places. You tend to find who people are and what their needs are, and monitor their progression and their care needs.
Mrs. Houston, what do you need from your manager to be able to provide care that's flexible and responsive to the needs of your residents?
Well, I'm fortunate to have a very forward-thinking Director of Nursing, and we've just currently undertaken a training provided by Dementia Care Matters, which is, they call it the butterfly model of caring for people with dementia. And it's just a wonderful program that really gets to the heart of people, and their slogan is "Feelings Matter Most." So that's where the care comes from, and we're in the process at the moment of a transition of change, starting with our memory support area. So we're changing the environment, we're changing, we're not wearing uniforms anymore, we're becoming colourful clothing, we're using music, we are there's a whole process of about 70 different things that we need to do to actually achieve the butterfly model status, and we're working towards doing that. We have a group of very dedicated care staff who are volunteering their time to meet with one another and continue this process so that it does happen for the well-being of our residents. And I'd really like to offer that model to the commissioners and ask them to look at that as a way of going forward, from the point of view of training as well for care staff. The part of it is an emotional intelligence screening, and I think people who are coming into workers' care workers should go through that process prior to even starting the Cert 3 training, because I think if you don't have the right makeup in your person to be able to care for older people, then probably not the right person to be doing that work. And I think it needs to be supported with education around dementia. The University of Tasmania has a free course which is very good, and the Dementia Care Matters people have already written a great training program. The work is already done, and I've handed some of that information to Erin and asked her to forward that on to you so that you can see all the work that's been done. It's already operating in the UK and Canada. and has been for the last 20 years, so we've seen it work. And I've been to Barunga, the butterfly house there, as they call it, and so I've walked through that home personally, and that's what has inspired me so much to want change and to see that it actually can happen without it having to be a major building project. There's just lots of things that we can just do on a daily basis, and it just sits at the heart of what care work should be, and it revolves around person-centred care. So I really hope that you will look at that as an alternative to training for the future and as a model of care for people in residential care.
How did you find out about that model of care, Mrs. Houston?
Just trying to remember now. I can't. Someone had been speaking about it. I had heard about it, and then for some reason one day I just decided I'm going to go and have a look. So I asked a couple of girls at work if they'd like to come, and a registered nurse came with me and a couple of care workers, and we went and we met with Louise Charlton, who was the person who did all the work to get the butterfly model happening at Barunga. And she was so inspirational, and they just completed the process, I think, when we went to have a look, and they were then building some more units to attach to that. But that was just a life-changing day for me, just going into that home and seeing what could be done, and just how happy the people were, how home-like the environment was, the engagement with the people. And it was very homely. They had a front door. We had to knock on the front door if you went to visit. It just wasn't people walking through there willy-nilly. And she told me that there was a lady there who hadn't been speaking for quite some time, and how she'd sort of come out of her shell once she was living in this different environment with a smaller number of people, and having lots of interaction with carers, and they live like a home. They have their meals together. They cook scones and have them for morning tea, and they go out in the garden and they feed the chooks and tend the vegetables, and it's more real. It's a real life, instead of we've just put people in a box in a home and said, we'll sit there and we'll get back to you when we can, and that's just awful. It's not acceptable.
Bearing in mind that your home is in a state of transition, what does it mean for the care that you're able to provide to the residents of where you work?
Well, we're gradually, people are coming on board with it as they're seeing it happen. I think for a little while some people have felt a bit uncomfortable about it, and, worried about the safety of residents, risks involved in letting them do things that they might not have done before. So it's a complete culture change, because it's not what we've learnt. When I first started aged care, we were very much be polite and friendly, but there's no dear or darling, or no terms of endearment to be used, and we're finding now that not all residents, but many of the residents do respond to human touch. They like to have a hug, particularly if they're teary or whatever, and because they are seeing the same faces continually, they're starting to build a bond with people. We've probably just cut down the amount of change we have in that area, so that the residents just get to be familiar with the faces that they see. So, you can imagine if you're not able to shower yourself, and every morning there's a different person coming in there, and they're going to take all your clothes off and they're going to wash your body, and if we think about those things, that's really confronting, and this is what we're doing to our older people.
Ms. Murphy, as someone that goes to or attends upon different aged care facilities throughout the course of a week, how do you manage providing a consistency of care and overcoming those tensions that Mrs. Houston has just described?
So I think it is a really real challenge to have new staff coming in all the time, and some residents aren't very open to having new people come in and deliver their care. They much prefer having more of a family feeling to the care that they receive. They like to have familiar faces. So for me, I tend to spend a lot of time providing emotional and social support, making them feel like they're actually a person, they're not just a task that I'm completing. So often I'll spend more time with them rather than just doing the tasks that are required to be done. Again, because of the sheer volume of residents that we look after, this means that time management's really challenging. Often, as an agency nurse, I'll be staying back well after I've finished just because I have spent that additional time talking to them and making them feel like they are valued and worthwhile of the time that I have for them.
Ms. Irwin, when you attend upon an aged care facility, are the residents that you see given a choice about the physiotherapy treatment that they receive?
Initially, when they first arrive at the facility, they're assessed for their pain levels to determine if they're appropriate for physiotherapy treatment. Once they're on that list, they have a trial period and then they get put on it permanently. From my experience, I haven't specifically seen people being asked if they're okay with this service. It's basically a trial run, and we tell them that we're coming in to give them this service. We do it for a week and then they get put on the list. Essentially, majority of the time they don't normally get a choice to say yes or no. And if we are going to treat them, I worked mostly in the dementia ward, so that a lot of them were a lot more not cognitively intact. I didn't see much of a choice being given because it was a box ticking type of service. I had to go, I had a certain list of people, a number of names I had to get through in a certain amount of time, and majority of these people couldn't communicate verbally, so I would sit down next to them, apply either the electrical equipment that is required for their pain management, or therapeutic massage, which also is supposedly delivers the same relief. But on the list that we are given, we're supposed to ask them for their pain rating before and after the service. There's no real way to do that. You can do it through physical behaviours with cognitively impaired people, but you couldn't really ask them. So I didn't see much of a choice being given to them. With the residents that were more cognitively intact, you would go and some of them would refuse, and if you could ask them, you would. Some of them would say yes, some of them would say no. If they refused, we were required to go back, ask them at least 2 times throughout the day if they wanted the service, and basically if we couldn't get to them and they kept saying no, you kind of go over and you talk to them, and I would be told to essentially start the treatment even if they had said no, and try and just apply it in a way that they almost wouldn't really notice. And I think that's quite demeaning, really. If you're cognitively intact and you're saying that you don't want something, then you're still being given it. I feel like it's not really, they're not really given much element of choice, because if they have to be ticked and it's what we've been told to do, I don't see how that's really much choice given in the matter.
Is it important to you that residents are given that choice?
Yes, I think so. I think it's very important, because if you're living in a place that's going to be your home indefinitely and you don't have that sense of choice in what you do throughout the day or what treatment that you're given, how can you expect to have any sense of independence or any improvement in quality of life?
You've given evidence earlier that you felt your role as a physiotherapist was a lot more pointless than that of the personal care worker. Could I ask you to expand on why that's your view?
Yeah. So the service that we provide is supposedly for a service of pain relief. Evidence shows throughout, because I've only recently graduated, we've been obviously taught the most up-to-date evidence-based practice. From evidence-based practice that I have learnt, therapeutic massage and electrical equipment that is supposedly to deliver pain relief is not a good function or deliverance of pain relief. So massage and TENS therapy, which is often what we use, the electrical stimulation, may provide very initial pain relief for some acute soft tissue injuries, but majority of people who are in aged care are obviously older. They have more chronic pain. It might be due to something different. We tend to go in and assess these people for their pain, but we ask them where their pain is and what it's like, but we don't find out where it's coming from, so we don't actually give them a full proper assessment of the cause of the pain, and then we apply a standardised approach to every single resident. And that to me doesn't really seem like that isn't what I've been taught to do. In my degree, I've been taught to assess impairment to see where the problem is coming from and how to appropriately treat it. And I feel I have the tools to be able to appropriately treat it. However, in the model that is currently in the system, I'm not able to use my clinical skills to treat the problems that are at hand in these people. So, for example, there would be maybe someone who has pain in their hip, and the reason for that is that they have very weak hip muscles, and me giving them a therapeutic massage for 20 minutes is not going to improve their function or their quality of life whatsoever. Whereas if I was able to go in and give them an exercise program, do some functional rehab training with them, maybe they would be able to sit to stand out of their chair a bit more easier. So that would be less work for the carers when they have to come in and help them off the toilet, and this person would gain more dignity, more sense of independence, a higher level of function, and then it would take the workload off the rest of the care staff that would otherwise have had to help them get off the toilet.
The Commission's previously heard evidence about the aged care funding instrument, ACFI, and it has heard that each resident in a residential care facility is assessed across 3 domains: daily living, behaviour and healthcare. Mrs. Irwin, do you have anything to do with ACFI in your role as a physio?
Most of our physio role is based on the funding model. So if a person comes in and they're assessed for their pain, they'll be put under a level 4A or a 4B. 4A means that they get 20 minutes of massage weekly, and 4B means that they have to be seen 4 days a week for 80 minutes all up, so 20 minutes 4 times a day. Essentially, we have to deliver this service in this amount of time for this particular services that are specified in the ACFI model, and it's either, like I said before, therapeutic massage or electrical equipment specific for pain management, which is not evidence-based.
Mm-hmm. In your view, Mrs. Irwin, can choice and control be achieved in the current aged care system?
In terms of physiotherapy, I don't think it's being achieved to its full potential. I think if the model changed its how it was funded for us to give treatment, then maybe there would be more a sense of choice and control, because we would be able to apply and individualise the treatment to each person who needs help to improve their quality of life and their function, and therefore overall kind of independence and like helpful in the way that they live in their home, which is essentially their aged care facility. I think that I don't have the ability to deliver person-centred care in terms of choice and control at the moment in the current funding model. No, I don't think so.
Mrs. Whitford, if I can turn to you, how do you deal with the ACFI as a manager?
Really, we're at an MPS site, so we don't have a lot I don't have a lot direct to do with the ACFI. Our referral process is through that system. Unfortunately, we have one physio for quite a large area, so we're lucky to get him for an hour a week. There is a physio assistant, but that is very infrequent as well. So yeah, there's not a lot of communication between the different departments as to how things are funded or what we're entitled to receive and the processes involved.
Do you feel that you're able to give residents, Mrs. Whitford, choice and control at your facility?
Sometimes. There's a couple of, I feel, blanketed policies which are very metro-based that just don't work out in the country. For example, our falls policy. Being a small facility, I'm the only nurse there, so when I'm not there, if residents have a fall, they have to be transferred to the acute hospital. If it's an unwitnessed fall, or if they fall and hit their head, they must be transferred for a minimum of 24-hour neurological obs to be done, which I find extraordinary. That it's very distressing, particularly those with dementia, to take them out of their familiar environment and put them into an acute ward, which is loud and very unfamiliar. And consequently, in my experience, they've actually had more falls because they get up in the night to try and go to the toilet and the toilet's no longer there. Or they get agitated because they're not sure where they are. I know in larger facilities they would have the registered nurses there to provide those services for the 24-hour up to 48 hours observation, but certainly in regional small facilities we don't have that luxury. So residents do have to be transferred, usually by volunteer ambulance officers.
Mrs Houston, if I could ask you to respond to that example that's just been given by Mrs Whitford.
Well, we are a larger home where I work. We have 53 residents, and we always have a registered nurse in the home 24/7. So a fall would be attended to immediately, and the registered nurse would then, or the enrolled nurse in charge would go through the process of assessing the person to see whether they're injured or whether they are able to stay in the facility. If it was something obvious that there was perhaps a broken hip or something, well, an ambulance would be called immediately. But if there's no obvious harm to the person, then they would have the constant monitoring of temperatures and blood pressure and so forth over, I think it's at least 24 hours. And just continually monitoring that person to make sure that there's no ill effects from that fall.
Mrs Murphy, do you find that with the different residential care facilities that you attend, there are different practices and policies in place when it comes to falls?
Yeah, there is. So most facilities have the same policies. So regarding a fall, the registered nurse on duty will do an initial assessment and ensure that there's no acute injuries. If there is an acute injury or if it is an unwitnessed fall, generally we would send them to hospital, which I find sometimes can be unnecessary. If it is an unwitnessed fall and they don't have any injuries, we're sending them as a precautionary measure, but they don't necessarily need to be in that acute environment. I think it is sustaining quality of life if we can manage them in the home. Other times, if there isn't an acute injury, we can continue to monitor them in the home for 24 hours, which sometimes, depending on the resident, I think can be maybe not the best practice. If they are a dementia patient, we're doing neurological observations on them, which means asking them where they are, what the date is, what the time is, things like that. Things that somebody suffering neurological issues or cognitive decline, wouldn't generally know anyway. It's intrusive, it's invasive. We're often waking them in the middle of the night to continue doing these observations. And I think this really impinges on quality of life, and it's definitely not person-centred care.
What do you say would support a resident's quality of life and your ability to deliver person-centred care in that?
So dignity of choice, I think, is at the centre of person-centred care. Letting them exercise their right to choose how they want to be treated. Obviously, we have advanced health directives and assessments that when they are admitted, them in conjunction with their family, they will choose what they wish to happen, like whether they want to be sent to hospital. But often facilities can override this as precautionary measures. As I said, if it's an unwitnessed fall, regardless of whether they want to be sent or not, we send them to hospital. I think having a doctor more easily accessible for facilities would help as well. That way we could have more comprehensive management in the facility, and just really understanding the needs and the wants of each resident, making it individual care.
Would you like to respond to that, Mrs Whitford?
Yeah, I just find in this day and age we take them out of a familiar home environment and put them in an acute facility where no one knows them other than their basic neurological observations. I think they could be better assessed in their home, if you want a better word, by people that do know them and can tell when maybe something's a little amiss. Obviously, I think it is very difficult rurally to access, the required physio review in the time that they request post-fall. It's difficult to even access the doctor, to be quite honest. A lot of rural towns, we're supported by locums. some weekends we may not have a doctor. You know, we need to be looking at nurse practitioners for these regions to assist the elderly and aged care facilities with prescribing basic antibiotics for a urine infection, or redoing the medication chart so that an analgesic can be given because we've used the last signature. I think it's, we just need to be, what works in the city does definitely not work in a lot of country areas. We don't have the resources.
And what's your experience of that, Ms. Irwin?
Honestly, I was going to ask if I could add to that. When I worked as a therapy assistant whilst I was in Perth, I wasn't obviously the physio running it. As soon as there was a fall, it wouldn't be a referral-based system. If there was a fall, the physio would go and assess this person to make sure that they had no acute musculoskeletal injuries. Since I worked in my current role, it's a referral-based system. So if somebody falls and no one puts in a referral, so a carer or a nursing staff member doesn't put in a referral for physio, we don't see them, even if we know that they have had that injury. So if there's no referral there, we're not funded to see them for that fall, so we don't see them. And there was actually a situation where I walked into one of the main living areas and someone was on the floor being attended to after a fall by the carers and the nursing staff, and I went over to try and assist, and the actual staff, they didn't want me to help because I don't know if it wasn't because they weren't aware of the training that we have in assessing musculoskeletal injuries, or because they were told that we're not supposed to be helping with that because of funding issues, or I'm not really sure why, but I was kind of almost brushed aside in that situation, whereas I feel like the training that we are provided with during our degree puts us at the forefront of helping with those situations. And it just really shocked me that we aren't included in the first on-call kind of assessment for those types of situations.
How would you be included?
Well, you would initially, because of the knowledge that we have of soft tissue and bony landmarks and things, you'd initially assess for any fractures, for any hip breaks, for anything to do with the major joint areas. We can assess neuro observations. We can assess for dermatome levels, so like any skin or neural issues. Like, we have a lot of assessment training to see that if there's any initial injuries, and then ongoing from that, if they did have any injuries that weren't immediately needed to be treated in hospital, that could be a part of our ongoing treatment if we were able to have a little bit more autonomy in how we treated a resident.
Mrs. Whitford, you've given evidence about the value of relationships and the importance for you of getting to know the residents in your home. Do you bear consistency of care in mind when you are working out the rosters for your personal care workers?
Yeah, certainly. I also try to not give the care workers late earlies because they have voiced to me that they struggle sometimes with those sort of shifts. So I'll try and, where I can, put them on like a couple of earlies in a row to just try and, some consistency. But we also have numerous things that happen in the home. Like on a Friday afternoon, we have happy hour. So between 4 and 5 they get together, and it can often extend, and we have some young kids who play music come and do that, and I've given them an old music book so maybe they can learn some of the older songs. It's uniting that aspect of there. And they, a lot of these people danced and met at farm balls and stuff like that, so it really does stimulate memories and good times. And we also just have regular, once a month we have a community lunch where we put on, we set up the main activity room and encourage family or visitors to attend, and they make a small donation, and that includes a 2-course meal that they can actually sit down and have with their relative because they can't necessarily go out. And that just, it minimises social isolation.
Do you have a kitchen at your facility, Mrs. Whitford?
A limited kitchen. We used to have a full working kitchen, but that got sort of decommissioned. and a lot of our meals come from the hospital now. There is a recent push to start using it again. One of our late shifts, the L shift we call it, primarily their role from 1 till 4:30 is activities, and some of the carers will get residents in the kitchen and they'll bake scones and do lots of different things, because a lot of these ladies were fantastic cooks. You know, on the farms they cook for shearers, they cook for all the workers, for numerous children, and they've still got that skill. There might be elements that they need assistance with, but they certainly have got that skill and they feel valued. You know, if you give them a purpose each day, they're happy to get up and chip in and help.
Mrs. Whitford, what do you say the role of the kitchen was?
Oh, it was the hub of the home. It provided fantastic atmosphere. Just the smells, the sensory stimulation. You know, you can wake up, smell that cooking, go and inspect. It was also an extra set of eyes in the facility, you know. And residents often had a great relationship with our cooks because it was someone that wasn't in their personal space, but they felt that they could go to and just have a general chat, you know, a friend be it.
Mrs. Houston, you've given evidence about your role in delivering food and understanding where residents are with food. What is your view of the role of food and meals and a kitchen space in a residential care setting?
Okay, well in our home we have 4 wings, so the meals are served to each wing. As I said earlier, the breakfast trolley is collected from the kitchen by the care staff, by a carer in each wing. That has on it cornflakes and porridge and juice, that sort of thing. And then the carers make toast in the wing, so we have that experience of the smells and it gets the appetites going because the smell of toast goes right through the home, which is nice. Our meal times are fairly set in time, so 8 o'clock the breakfast is when breakfast is supposed to be served, and lunch is at 12, well, it starts at 11:45, the first trolley comes out. But I think that's something that is a part of the butterfly model, which is a major change that's required in that we need to have almost 24-hour access to food service. It encourages care staff or any staff, maintenance staff, to sit at the tables with the residents and enjoy the meal with them. And it should be like a slow process where the food is enjoyed and it's an interactive time. And currently we just serve the people as you would in a restaurant, where we put the food in front of them, and some people will need some help, but they have their meal and then they leave the table and we clean up after them. So it's a very, what would you say? It's not home-like. Whereas, you know, in your home, people come and go, they sit at the table, they get up and leave, they talk to one another, they laugh, they interact, and I think that we could just do our meal service so much in a much more homely and friendly way, and that actually would help people eat better, which obviously would help their health. It's a social activity, it's conversation, and really when you don't have a lot happening in your life, meals can become quite an important part of you know, what happens to you in a daytime, and that's your enjoyment. So that's the one thing we're moving towards with the butterfly care in the dementia area, is to just be much more flexible, not so time driven about meal times.
Mrs. Whitford.
Yes, I'd just like to add to that. I know the kitchen staff that assist us in our facility often remark how in the acute high end, they actually need to physically assist feeding because it won't happen. The nursing staff are so busy out on the acute end that they drop the meals off, they go back to get them, and they're still there. So
We have a lot of people that we have to assist, physically put the food in their mouths for them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's
yeah.
quite normal. Yeah,
It's time constraints.
it is.
Ms. Murphy, as someone that attends a variety of different residential care facilities, do you have any examples to offer to the Commissioners as a positive example of food service and delivery done well in aged care?
Yeah, so a lot of facilities have well documented care plans for each resident. So in aged care, depending on cognitive ability or motor skills, they could be on a modified diet or thickened fluids, for example, to aid in swallowing. So if this isn't well documented, it can obviously mitigate a lot of risks clinically and social. I mean, if you aren't aware that the person can feed themselves, then the meal may be dropped off, and then if you go to pick it up, you might think, maybe they're not hungry today, we'll take it away. But in actual fact, they can't cut up the meal themselves, they can't feed themselves. So I think a good example is when it's really well documented, and when you have a really good team environment. As an agency nurse, sometimes you aren't very welcomed to the environment, sometimes you're not very well supported. Again, I would say that this mainly stems from time constraints. A lot of the time you don't have the time at the start of the shift to be well orientated, you kind of just get your hand over and off you go. So I think it's really important to understand the needs of each person, and if this is well documented or you have staff that support you, I think it makes it a lot easier, and then it's a safe environment as well.
We've heard evidence in this commission about the lack of motivation for people to work in aged care. In particular, Ms Murphy, you refer in your statement to the lack of motivation for qualified nurses to enter aged care. Why is that, Ms Murphy?
I believe it stems from a misconception of aged care. Personally, going through my training in my degree, it's not focused towards aged care at all. We're trained in a hospital sort of setting, so a lot of the clinical placements that we do are conducted in a hospital environment. Aged care isn't very well talked about. I don't think it is identified as a specialty area, and it 100% is a specialty area. I think you need very specific staff, as you were saying. You need people that are the right fit to provide emotional and social care. You need people that identify emotional and social care as an important, paramount part of the well-being of people. And I think sometimes working in aged care can hinder your career opportunities. So, for example, I am experiencing applying for hospital jobs, you're less qualified to progress. So I think because aged care isn't very clinical and there isn't a lot of clinical opportunity, because if something happens, we'll send them to a hospital. We're not managing them in care, in the home, and we can provide that care. So I think it's a misconception, and I think that generally speaking, the community isn't aware of the care that we provide in aged care. And certainly as a nurse that's training, preparing to graduate, I had no idea the opportunity of the care that you could provide.
Ms Irwin, you're no longer working in aged care, are you?
No, I'm not.
Is it something you're interested in returning to?
At this point in time, probably not, no.
And why is that, Ms Murphy?
We have very limited potential as physiotherapists to actually apply the evidence-based knowledge that we've learnt throughout our degree, and I think that affects people's willingness to go into aged care following their graduation, because people know as soon as you graduate and you get an aged care job, unless you are making huge effort to get out of it to apply for somewhere else, you're pretty much stuck in that position. Like Emma was saying, you don't get good clinical experience, you don't get to use your evidence-based knowledge, you don't learn or progress in your physiotherapy skills working in aged care. So I think there's a huge lack of motivation, a lack of basically motivation to go into aged care, because people know that they will not be using any of the skills that they have learnt as a physiotherapist to improve people's quality of life. It's very passive. We don't improve function. We don't help people to gain a better sense of independence. And it's almost, when people know, I've spoken to students who are past, present and future about pracs in aged care. Most people do tend to have a practical placement throughout their degree. Everyone it's the worst attitude towards it. So people will just say, I cannot believe that I have to go to this prac for 5 weeks. It's going to be, such a drag. I'm not looking forward to it, because you don't learn anything. It's static, it's passive.
If I could turn to you, Mrs Houston, you've described the work that you've been doing with dementia care matters and the butterfly model. What opportunities are there for your career progression from your current position?
Well, probably nothing really. What I'm doing is committing myself to my work and having the opportunity to speak today. But as far as improving myself or having a leadership position or whatever, there's nothing offering, nothing that I can aspire to at this stage as far as I'm aware. If I was to go through the nursing path, perhaps if I was an enrolled nurse or a registered nurse, I might be considered for something, but because I am a personal care worker, it's not considered that I would have a leadership role despite my passion and desire to do better. But it won't stop me from giving my best, and that's where we're at, I guess.
Mrs Whitford, you've described to the Commissioners the difficulty in attracting or engaging workers in a rural setting. Would you like to make some observations on what's been said?
Yeah, I think the job descriptions are very generic, and often our roles, we've got different caps on basically. They need to be more direct and more clear, the roles that we're expected to have and facilitate. I find that there's a very, feedback up is very muted. Often we may have issues, but if it's not, we've got no way of feeding that upward. And I find, it's very much a dictatorship type industry. I would love, for some of the policy makers to be able to explain why they've made that policy and perhaps receive the feedback, as in this will work, this won't work, or just constructive, criticisms really. Rurally I don't think there's a huge incentive for staff to go other than a small locality allowance. There's not a huge incentive or draw card for professionals to advance their career in the rural areas.
Ms Murphy, someone who's at the beginning of their career in nursing, what would motivate you to continue to work in aged care?
My passion would probably be the only motive. As I said, career-wise, there isn't a huge progression ahead of me, or anyone for that matter in aged care. I think you're quite restricted to where you can go with your career. I mean, I could move rurally, which I think would expand my scope of practice a little bit, but other than that, I don't think there's much of a motive to stay in aged care. I guess unless you are passionate about it and you do love providing the care, then it's probably not something that people would tend to stay in. And I do find that there is quite a large staff turnover in aged care because it is such a demanding and stressful industry. I think that people often, they burn out and then they go and look for something where it might be more manageable, particularly hospitals where you do have legislative staff minimums. We don't have that in aged care, which I think is the root of a lot of issues that we all face. We just have too many people to care for, and I think the quality of care is sometimes affected. And it's hard. It's hard to face that.
Mrs Houston, you've described with some detail the work of the butterfly model. Would you like to, using that model, describe a positive example to your mind of person-centred care?
Okay, it would be being able to go into a person's room and give them my full attention for however long it takes for their needs to be met in relation to getting them out of bed and showering them, dressing them, whatever. So it would be allowing them to choose what they want to wear, allowing them to do whatever they can in dressing themselves. So it might take 5 minutes for them to do up all their buttons, but that would be so lovely just to let them do that instead of reaching over and doing it for them, and just to choose whatever clothes they want to put on, decide whether they even want to get out of bed. Sometimes people don't want to get up till 11 o'clock, and that should be okay if that's their choice. and also with their food, just to not just to have to come and sit at the table now because it's mealtime, to be able to say, are you hungry? Or, you know, if they're not able to respond, obviously you have to present the food to them. But sometimes people just don't feel like eating, and well, the food gets whisked away then, so then they've just got to wait till the next lot of food arrives, and there's plenty of it, and people are not left hungry at all. But I think we can just do so much more with food, and be allowing people to participate in the preparation of food, whether that might be pouring a cup of tea or spreading a piece of bread or something they would have done themselves, and just giving them little jobs to occupy them. It can be as simple as folding some washing, some tea towels, or just household things that might be done, sweeping a floor or going along with a duster, or just something that makes them feel they're doing what they did before, or taking someone outside and letting them hold the hose on the garden. That can be so enjoyable to them, and it's an opportunity to chat. You can talk about the weather, you can talk about the trees and the flowers, and whatever it is in their past that we know through their personal life story, it's an opportunity to share that. And the butterfly model is excellent in the way that it approaches behaviour management, and people with dementia often act out. They have what we call behaviours, but that comes from trying to express a need, and there will always be a need, whether it's they're hungry, thirsty, they're tired, they have pain, whatever that might be. And it's up to care workers to be able to work through a process and find out what is causing that behaviour, and then meeting that need. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of knowing of a person to do that. It takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of teamwork and communication with one another, so that we can compare observations about what's going on, and is this happening at the same time every day. And there's just so many factors to it, and I think for a long time aged care has not been acknowledged as a specialist field, and it certainly is. And care working is actually a specialised field in itself as well. And I've had other employment through my life, done lots of other things, but I just love doing what I'm doing. I was going to be a nurse, that's what I wanted to do, but once I was hands-on with people in aged care, I didn't want to move on with that any further. I felt a real desire to be with people and to meet their emotional needs, and not just to be handing out pills, and then as you work down the scale it just takes you further and further away from the resident. And nurses spend all day sitting in front of a computer typing care plans, but they don't actually come and sit with people and know them, and we do. We are the eyes and ears of nurses, and we are the voice and the advocate of residents.
Mrs. Whitford, what needs to change?
Really, staffing. We work very hard to make these care plans, but no one has time to read them. In real fact, like, it ticks the accreditation boxes, but the time given could be so better spent. You spoke about the butterfly model. In our region, there's a big push lately for the spark of life, which is a similar philosophy. And that is really person-centred care, and how to adjust your environment to provide that. But a lot of training and a lot of time is required, and everyone needs to be on board, and it's months of preparation. I think just access. I often go in on a weekend to provide wound care. Like, I just know if I don't do it, it won't be done. And that's providing person-centred care, because if it's not done and they have to be taken to the hospital for it to be done, well, that's not always appropriate in my eyes. And we about 12 months ago had a resident who was in end-stage palliative care. She was very fearful of hospitals. She made us, wanted us to promise her she'd never go to the hospital. Staff went above and beyond to ensure that she was comfortable in her home, she called it. And up until the last 48 hours, we managed to keep her there. That was a lot of volunteer time, people just being with her, sitting with her. And then she had a fall. Thankfully, by that stage, she probably wasn't quite aware that she had been transferred. But that was a major effort, and everyone felt so proud that they were pretty well able to keep her wish. So it's just, yeah, you can't just knock off and go home.
What's your message to the Royal Commission, Mrs Whitford?
I just think that aged care needs to be funded like the acute sector, particularly in our rural hospitals. They're combined, and it's often not very transparent where the lines are. A lot of our high-end aged care are left when an emergency comes in. Now, I personally think there should be someone with them 24/7. They are your high-end care recipients that need someone to be there, particularly if they have a behavioural outburst, and that can definitely impede on the other residents for their own security and just your holistic view, you know, being the eyes and ears and just sitting with them, being with them. It's very much understaffed, but not just understaffed, it needs to be an improved skill mix. You need to have people on the floor that can educate and assist the carers to provide the best care we can.
Mrs Howson, if I can turn to you, what's your message to this Royal Commission?
Well, I guess I wrote my submission from the point of view that, you know, so much has been said in previous hearings and is still to come, I guess, about the negatives of aged care and what's happening in homes. And my experience is that there are some fantastic homes, fantastic care staff and dedicated leaders in the community, and that needs to be acknowledged as well. But my purpose was to try and find a way forward, so that's why I brought the butterfly model to the table. I have no connection to them whatsoever. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but I do absolutely believe in what they're doing, and I think it's just such a positive and appropriate and tested and tried method of moving forward with aged care. So I really just wanted to bring that forward so that it would be somewhere to go, because at the end of this there's so much sadness and so much hurt for some people, and I think for them we need to show them some change, and that there is a way through this, and aged care in Australia just has to have a complete culture change, and we need to be valuing our older people. They're all people who have lived lives, paid their taxes, and they're just ordinary people like us that we've had, nurses and school principals and hairdressers and people of all walks of life that have come into our care, that have worked really hard and had productive lives, that now through no fault of their own, their age is affecting the way they can live, and we should be just there to serve them and to fill the gaps in their life, and just to make a difference to just the ordinary everyday part of their living while they are still alive, so that it's not just, well, we'll just stick them over there where we can't see them, where we won't worry about that, because it's all a bit yucky when people get old and they're just not themselves anymore. And we are fearful of that. I think we all are fearful of where our life's going to go, which is why we have to do something, start making change, because we're all going to get older, and quite any one of us here in this room could end up with dementia. There's no cure and there's no known cause. So any one of us sitting here today could easily end up in a residential facility. So think about what do you want if that happens to you? How do you want to be treated? What choice do you want to have? At the moment you get put in a small room and you have a variety of people coming in and providing care for you, but there's so much missing, and it doesn't have to be like that.
If I can turn to you, Ms Irwin, what's your message to the Royal Commission?
I think that we have an ageing population. People are getting older, they're living for longer, and with it is becoming more issues, like physical issues, emotional issues, social issues. I think that what's most important in aged care, which has seemed to be overlooked for a long time, is the resident. It's the person that lives there, that's their home, that's their life. They should be the most important thing in any aspect of care, whether it be emotional, social or physical. My frustration is that the focus is on pain, not physical function. The more that we focus on somebody having pain, the harder it's going to be to improve their physical function. And the happiness and satisfaction that you can give someone from such a small input to improve something that they can do more independently, like a hand movement or a strength in their legs or some sort of transfer so that they can do things easier, is so immense. And none of us, because we're functioning physically so well, none of us would know how that feels. But you can see the results of people who have been rehabbed, that it affects physical function, can affect emotional health so much. So I think it's really, really important. And the issue is that we have, from a physiotherapy perspective, we have the skills, we have the knowledge, we're willing and we're able to improve these people's quality of life. And we have so much access to evidence-based practice at the moment. With the knowledge that we have on the internet and studies and things that are so up to date is so immense, and we're not using these skills to improve the most important people in aged care's quality of life. And I think that needs to change sooner rather than later.
Ms Murphy, if I can ask you that same question, what's your message to this Royal Commission?
Yeah, so I just want to elaborate on something Patty said earlier, that personal care workers do provide the forefront of emotional care. I became a nurse because I want to care for people. At the moment, we spend a lot of time in front of the computer, we're doing documentation, we're doing medications, and while they're all equally important parts of a person's care, it's fundamental to be able to look after and nurture their emotional and social well-being. And I think that what that would look like in aged care in terms of change is legislative minimums for staffing, both care staff, allied health, registered nurses. We need more people in the industry. I'd like to see a bigger influx of qualified nurses, like new graduates coming into aged care, a greater appreciation for the industry, and a bigger focus on the emotional side of care. Like, it is so important, it's so fundamental. If you don't have a good social or emotional well-being, then you're not likely to engage in clinical care, you won't engage with the physio, you won't look to improve or maintain your quality of life. And I think to do the best that we can in delivering this care is dignity of choice. It's individual care. There's no one size fits all. You've got to adapt to each person. And I think, again, that's obviously such a time-consuming process. So we just need more staff to facilitate these sort of changes that need to happen, because these people, they deserve better care. They're paying for better care, and we want to provide that.
Would any of you like to respond to what each of you have said?
Yeah, I'd like to. I agree. In South Australia, the Enterprise Bargaining Agreement recommends 3.2 hours per care per day for each resident. Currently, we are still not achieving that. And it's not very clear either, like, what do you class direct care? Is that allied health? Is that diversional therapy? Is it direct carers? So I think there needs to be some clarification around the actual staffing ratios. I also think that the fee structure needs to be a lot clearer. A lot of the elderly that come and want to enter are very concerned about the cost, and there's still definite confusion out there as to how much it's going to cost them. Do they need to sell their home? What can they do? They're very, very fearful. These people have worked extremely hard and saved very well through years of depression, and that is a major concern for them. And I think we would be able to assist them earlier if they felt more confident with what the requirement from them was. And regarding care plans, we do have the internet. However, rurally, we're still paper-based. We don't have the network to facilitate care. So we're still using a lot of our carer hours old school. So even though the recommendations state that we use lead care or alternative, we don't have access to that. So we still have to do the full assessment and then write up the care plans.
Commissioners, that concludes my examination.
Ms Irwin, thank you for your evidence. Why is it that you're not allowed or not able to apply your skills in the workplace? Is it they've got a strict requirement about those two forms of therapies and that's it?
Yep. So if you actually go and look at the ACFI funding model under the complex healthcare heading, there is a few boxes and it's got a whole bunch of different things on wound care and things, but the things that relate to pain management is that you're either a 4A or you're a 4B. So you get 4A is the 20 minutes per week of either electrical therapy to affect basically pain, to treat pain, or therapeutic massage. If you actually go into the model says the funding model says we use evidence-based assessments to assess people's pain. If you actually go into the website, the Australian Pain Association website that has that assessment on it, part of that website says these two therapies should not be used as a base intervention for pain management, as they're only passive temporary interventions. So I don't even know where that has come from. So it seemed to have been kind of a gradual input of this system. It wasn't all of a sudden everyone has to be on the list. It's gradually management kind of encouraging people to get put on it, and then more people, and all of a sudden it's just turned into this, we have to tick these people off, this is the only thing we have time to do. If we get time, then maybe if we have a referral for mobility assessment, then we'll do that as well. But this has become somehow the main treatment, and I just don't understand who's decided that these therapies need to be implemented when strengthening and exercise-based interventions are so much more evidence-based for improving any sort of pain and quality of life.
I couldn't agree more, and we'll certainly have a look at that, because enablement and rehabilitation done effectively is pretty fundamental to people's quality of life.
Yeah.
So thanks for your evidence, and I might say thank you to your colleagues too. I really appreciate your frankness and your very interesting commentary on what it's like to work in the system.
I would only add that the thing that impressed me most, despite all the practical difficulties which you confront on a daily basis, the humanity that came across in your obvious great care for the patients who you've looked after over the years came through, and it's just so important that good aged care be available in this country, and you've been very helpful in guiding us to know how that can be done. Thank you all.
Thank you.
The Commission will adjourn until 12:15.